It had been a weird day at the end of a weird week. When Irvin Dusty Dustman left for work that morning, he felt a tension in the air he couldn't quite explain. It had been building from a vague nibbling at the back of his mind since a week ago when his wife told him about the party. He couldn't have explained it if someone had asked him, didn't even consciously put his mind to it, and it wasn't even a coherent thought, but he felt unsettled, disquieted, almost as if he was subtly waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was just a feeling, and it made him nervous and jittery all day at work. He tried to concentrate. He didn't want to go to the party, truth be told. He never liked going to any of his wife's office parties. Effing smug-ass lawyers, they all think their shit doesn't stink, he thought to himself. You can't skip an office Christmas party, Dusty. It just wouldn't be right. He remembered his wife insisting when he tried to beg off. Of course, he would do what his wife wanted. He always did what his wife wanted. As he shut his computer down to end his week, Dusty looked over at the photo of his two sons taken during a fishing trip last year. He smiled brightly. It seemed his relationship with his boys was the only bright light in his home life in the last few months. Halfway through the drive home, traffic was slowed around an accident in the right-hand lane of the highway. Dusty realized that he was so wrapped up in his own thoughts that he wasn't even aware of exactly where he was on his drive. Due to the accident, Dusty arrived home about 15 minutes later than usual. Instead of what was once a hello kiss when he walked in the door, Dusty knew the only thing he was going to get from his wife was a snide comment. She didn't disappoint. It's not like you couldn't get home on time for once, Tracy griped. Now get changed into your gray pinstripe suit. That's my favorite. Dusty silently shook his head. He was planning to wear his dark blue suit, which he felt was more commanding. The gray suit was nice, but he tended to blend into the background more. He most certainly didn't want to blend into the background around these people. James Fielding, the newest partner in Chicago's highest-profile criminal law firm, was hosting the firm's annual holiday party in his large Northside home. As they entered, Dusty could feel Tracy becoming more and more tense. She was talking rapidly, and her eyes blinked nervously, always a sign that she was feeling stress. As they reached the door to what appeared to be a large, entertaining area, Tracy's grip on his arm tightened and she pulled him to the side, pressing him back against the wall and wrapping him in her arms. Tracy, what's going on? Is something wrong? He asked. No, I just wanted to say. What? He asked. Listen, Dusty, you know I love you. I always have, and I just want you to remember that. Whatever happens tonight, it doesn't matter between us. Nothing is ever going to change. I just want you to remember that. We're fine. I know you don't like these people, and it may be shocking, but as long as you remember that nothing is going to change between us, you're going to be okay. I have no idea what you're talking about, Dusty said. You're right. I don't fit in with all these lawyers and high-powered jerks. But what's different? These events have never been fun for me, but I'll just put up with it like I always have. Just remember, we're okay, she said. She stepped back away from him and let him lead her into the room. Fielding was holding court in front of a large bar, which featured a painting of a naked woman lying on a bed. Dusty moved off to the side of the bar to get a white wine for Tracy and a scotch for himself, nodding to Fielding when the two locked eyes for a second. Fielding nodded back and gave Dusty an evil leer. Dusty hated that look. In fact, he wasn't sure he didn't hate Fielding as well. Dusty got the two glasses and moved to intercept Tracy, who was heading for Fielding and his group. Tracy had maneuvered Dusty, so his back was to the bar. He stood on the outside of the group. Tracy worked her way over to Fielding, who gave her a polite peck on the cheek before going back to pontificating about something. Standing on the periphery, Dusty really wasn't paying attention to the conversation. He glanced around a bit, catching another quick look at the nude painting, and thought to himself that it was fitting for Fielding to have a nude painting so prominent in the room. When Dusty zoned back into the room, he thought he saw several people looking in his direction. Instinctively, he looked down at his suit to see if he had spilled something on himself, or, God forbid, his fly was open. He didn't see any spills, and a subtle check on his fly revealed it was up. Still, the looks continued. Feeling uncomfortable, Dusty turned toward the bar, again glancing at the painting. The painting was incredibly erotic, Dusty thought. The raven-haired beauty was laying nude and glassy-eyed on a bed, obviously just having had what appeared to be very satisfying sex. It was a look he knew all too well, on a face he knew all too well. The woman in the painting was standing right next to him. Dusty stopped thinking. For that matter, he stopped breathing, too. He stood open-mouthed staring at the painting. He didn't notice Fielding and his wife exchange smirks. Gradually, others in the room turned toward Dusty, some smirking, others with pity showing on their faces. After what felt like forever but was probably only 10 seconds, Dusty gathered himself and whispered to his wife, "That's you." The room had gone completely silent when Dusty stared at the painting, and his whispered exclamation might as well have been a scream for the volume it carried. "No," Tracy said quietly. "That woman has black hair, and I have auburn, silly." She giggled softly, which only seemed to make her disclaimer even more false. Several people looked from Tracy to the painting and back again, and several more were laughing quietly. Fielding gave Tracy a quick wink. Dusty looked over at his wife, then shifted his gaze back to the painting. In an almost catatonic voice he said, "Black hair, but auburn pubic hair. Your pubic hair." Tracy looked hard at the painting. Although she had seen the painting before, she hadn't noticed that the painter had left her pubic hair the actual color, not making the change to black like he had with her hair. She quickly wondered if that had been intentional or was a mistake. Not that it really mattered. Tracy had surmised Dusty would eventually figure out that the painting was of her, but she and Fielding had figured it would be later on in the evening, after he had been softened up by a few drinks. Neither had planned on such a quick reveal. Dusty felt two sets of strong hands grab him by the arms and shoulders. He was hustled out of the main room into a smaller one to the side. Fielding and Tracy followed a second later. Fielding practically sneered at the smaller man. "Listen, you little nerd. This is how it's going to be from now on. Your wife is going to be my slave, and you get to keep her and your home life when I'm not using her," Fielding said. "Fight this, and the firm will represent Tracy and take everything you have, and I'll still be screwing her." Dusty looked back and forth between Fielding and his wife. He felt both literally and figuratively trapped. "This has been going on for quite a while now, and you never had a clue," Tracy explained. "So you lost nothing. We're not going to change anything. You and I are going to continue on as we always have, and I will continue to see Jim, or I will take half of everything we own in a divorce and continue to see Jim. The choice is yours. Most of my coworkers and friends already know you're a cuck. Just about the only ones who don't know yet are the boys and your friends. This is just about your ego. I mean, we can continue to be man and wife, with all that implies, or why would I want to sleep with you ever again?" Dusty replied. "You're screwing him. You've made that quite clear. I'm just an afterthought. I'm not taking sloppy seconds from James Fielding's 304. Feel better now, Dusty, now that you've gotten to call me whore? What's next? You going to accuse me of having cooties? God, he was so right about you. You are just a little man." Fielding's laughter reverberated in the room as Dusty was escorted out of the room and then the house. Dusty heard the laughter as he left. He held his tears in check barely. "Did you see the look on Hub's face when he saw that painting?" crowed Fielding to Tracy. "You do know that he's smart enough to figure out when that was done. At least started. Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to apologize to him. But when he practically accused me of cheating, I guess I figured I needed to get back at him somehow. The painting was a great idea, Jim. But you were cheating on him at that point," Fielding laughed. Tracy followed Dusty out, figuring she would need to calm her husband. In truth, Dusty had questioned his wife several times in the past year when things didn't quite add up, but each time Tracy had gotten on her high horse about her husband not trusting her. That argument had successfully backed down Dusty, who felt bad that he questioned his wife of 27 years. As the two drove home, Dusty reflected back on Tracy's 12-year career with the Scott Hansen LLC. After staying home raising the couple's two sons until they had gone to school, Tracy decided she wanted to go back to work. At first, she was assigned to Old Man Hansen, the firm's senior partner, but when Hansen retired 3 years previously, he was replaced by 35-year-old Fielding, a 6'4", 220-pound Hulk who made 47-year-old Tracy nervous by the way he looked at her, she admitted. Despite that, she chattered on about her new boss for the first 2 months, then suddenly went radio silent. Dusty knew that Tracy could still turn heads with her long hair and amazing curves. He still thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever met, and often wondered how he had gotten lucky enough to land that prize. Not that Dusty was an ugly dweeb. He was only 5'9", but a solid 170. He was quiet by nature and analytical, typical traits most people would associate with accountants, which he, in fact, was. When Dusty found out that Tracy's new boss was a large, handsome younger guy, he figured he would try to keep track of his wife's comings and goings. Tracy didn't work late with Fielding any more than she had with the old man, at least until about a year ago. Then, the late nights started increasing before a week-long trip to New Orleans with Fielding for some kind of legal symposium. Dusty wasn't happy that Tracy had to make the trip, but he understood that as his admin, there were going to be times that she would have to make trips. He still put in his 2 cents with his wife, at which point she loudly accused him of not trusting her, despite the two being married for more than 25 years. No longer in the Christmas spirit when he got home, Dusty poured himself a single malt scotch and practically staggered over to his favorite lazy boy. It's not every day when your life turns to shit in a matter of minutes. He cried like a baby for the next 5 minutes. At least until this past year, Dusty thought he had the perfect marriage. Then the little cracks seemed to show up, although at first, he didn't want to see them. Then his wife denied that those cracks even existed. Dusty had to admit that aside from working late and the trip to New Orleans, things between the pair had seemed pretty normal. The sex hadn't suddenly ramped up or been cut off. He had noticed, though, that his wife's wardrobe seemed to get younger and sexier, and lately her attitude toward him had turned to shit. Dusty drank several single malts and finally drifted off to sleep in his chair while watching the classic Christmas movie It's a Wonderful Life. Tracy finally woke him at 1:45 a.m. to try to get him to sleep in the couple's bed. "I've got to admit, I didn't see that coming, Tracy. Not sure I'd ever want the boys to see that painting, though," Dusty commented dispassionately. Tracy blushed deeply. From the look on her face, Dusty realized that she hadn't considered her children when she posed for the portrait. Dusty was barely able to keep himself from lashing out at his wife physically. She would never know that her deceased father-in-law's teaching had probably kept her out of the hospital. When he collected himself, Dusty unballed his fists. Tracy saw the movement and her eyes got wide. A chill of realization came over her that she perhaps pushed her husband to the edge. "Well, since we're being so open and honest, how about answering 2 questions for me?" "Why, and for how long?" Dusty asked. Tracy studied the pile of the carpeting for a few seconds while her face changed expressions. "We didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. About a year ago. We found we had a lot in common. You and I had gotten stale. Jim's a take-charge kind of guy, and he kind of took charge of me. I liked it. I liked it a lot. And then when you sort of accused me of cheating, I got mad, and Jim and I came up with a way for me to get even. But you were already cheating. That's not getting even. That's rubbing my face in it." Which? She looked up at Dusty like she was going to reply, then put her head down silently. "So, what you're telling me is that you opted for new, young, exciting over same old, same old. What we had for all those years didn't mean anything to you," Dusty said. "I still love you, Dusty. I'm just not in love with you anymore. Jim and I connect on so many levels, and it's new and exciting." "Of course it is, you bimbo. You're a new piece of meat to him, and he's a new stick to you. You haven't gone through the rigors of everyday life with him, raised children with him, come home and done daily chores. Shit. And what's with that picture, that painting? You would never have let me take a risque cell phone photo of you, but you posed naked and well-drilled for some painter so Mr. Wonderful can hang you in plain sight in his home, and everybody can see what a beautiful 304 you are." Tracy blushed deeply again. She started concentrating on her shoes. Dusty kept his eyes on her, and she eventually looked up. It was very exciting, being naked in front of another man right after having sex with Jim. Knowing that he was recording our lovemaking for everyone, Tracy admitted. "Did you screw the painter, too?" Dusty blurted out. "Well, once. After my last posing session. Jim and I thought we owed him one after teasing him for most of the week. Of course. Fair is fair," Dusty snarked. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Dusty asked, "Did you forget about the boys?" "The boys? What do they have to do with this?" Tracy asked back. "This has nothing to do with the boys. They're out of the house now and have their own lives. You don't see breaking up our family as having no impact on the boys? You're not going to break up our family. You don't want any more people than necessary knowing you are a cuck," Tracy ridiculed. "Besides, I know you love me. Give me this for a little while, and after this it can be me and you again, just like always." "I overestimated you all these years," Dusty said. "First, I thought you loved me as much as I loved you. Second, I thought you were fairly smart." Tracy pulled a face when Dusty finished his last statement, so he figured he should elaborate for her. "Tracy, a no-fault divorce does not mean there is no one at fault. It just means the state doesn't want to screw around with trying to find fault in splitting assets. I am not afraid to tell the world that I am a cuck, because you are an unfaithful 304. What do you think the boys are going to say to that?" Tracy stammered. She stuttered. Finally, she choked out, "You wouldn't. Watch me." "Which? You would ruin my relationship with my boys to get back at me? You scumbag," she hissed. "No, Not to ruin your relationship, but to accurately tell my side of the story, you witch. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Confident when the confrontation started, Tracy looked defeated as she whispered, "Can't we discuss this further?" "I'm afraid not." "Who?" "Tracy. You had sex with him in his bed. Now you get to lie in it. Besides, what have I ever done to give you the impression that I would put up with you screwing another guy?" Both of the couple's sons were shocked to hear their father's news when he called them the next day. "Are you sure, Dad? That doesn't sound anything like Mom," Robbie, the couple's oldest, said when Dusty called him first. She and Loverboy even had a painting done showing her, after sex. It was hanging above his bar. The two of them and the rest of their staff thought it was great fun, Dusty said. "No, that's ridiculous," Robbie shouted over the phone. Mike, 2 years younger, listened quietly to Dusty's whole story before commenting. "Wow, Dad. What the hell did you do to piss Mom off? She would never have done something like this without being provoked." Dusty sat silent for a few seconds, trying to figure out exactly how to respond to his disbelieving son. "I think I let her down after all these years. He was younger, bigger, more forceful, and basically, someone new and different. I'm not buying it, Dad." "Sorry," Mike said. "Believe what you want, Mike. She shat on me, and I'm not going to take that." Tracy was served a week later. She tried to fight it, tried to get the judge to agree to marital counseling. It seemed like the judge was leaning in her favor until Dusty asked her to explain to him about the naked painting of her hanging in James Fielding's home. The judge looked shocked at Dusty's pronouncement. "Seriously?" he asked Dusty. "Naked and well satisfied, from the looks of things, Your Honor. In another man's house? Mrs. Dustman?" Tracy started to answer the judge when her attorney put his hand on her arm to stop her. "Better to keep quiet rather than telling the judge you were a smug, stupid bitch after cheating on your husband," he whispered to her. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized with everything split 50-50. As the house was sold as part of the settlement, Tracy moved in with her lover, while Dusty moved into a small apartment near his place of employment. Jim Fielding just finished pouring himself a single malt at his bar when he glanced at the painting of his lover, Tracy Dustman. He remembered how much fun it was to have Tracy pose for that painting after the pair had sex several times, with her face showing how freshly drilled and satisfied she was. Her husband was starting to catch on to the fact that she was having an affair, and the two lovers decided to beat him to the punch and rub his face in the affair. Both were sure that her quiet, unassuming husband would buckle to the new arrangement, but if not, Tracy would take half of Dusty's assets and Jim would continue to enjoy her body. The divorce was a little over a year ago, but lately things between Tracy and Fielding had seemed strained. She seemed to be getting clingier, although Jim had always made it clear to her that marriage was not on the table. A little more than a year and a half into their relationship, Tracy had noted that the heat of her affair had cooled, along with the actual sex. At least with Dusty, she could count on 27 years of loving affection, little touches, little caresses. She began to understand that the only thing love and lust have in common is the first letter of both words. 6 months later, Tracy moved into her own small apartment after she and Jim Fielding called it quits. 1 week after that, she was reassigned to be the admin for one of the newer attorneys. She knew the reassignment was coming, but the money and benefits stayed the same, so she actually welcomed the change. Her new direct boss was a handsome young graduate of Georgetown Law School, with the attitude of a hotshot attorney on the way up, Tracy thought. She wondered to herself if the attitude came with the jurisprudence degree. It took all of 2 weeks before Mr. Hotshot put his lips gently to Tracy's. She promised herself she wasn't going to allow him to get to her, but she apparently lied to herself. 6 weeks after beginning work for the new guy, 52-year-old Tracy had her ankles over the 31-year-old lawyer's shoulders as he pounded her in his bed. "Did I tell you that 304 was a hell of a good one?" Fielding asked the young attorney a couple of weeks later. "That painting over your bar was just a tease." "She is awfully good," Mr. Hotshot agreed. "Got rid of that painting," Fielding said. "Donated it to a fancy-ass strip club about an hour from here for $5,000 cash. I will write off the full $15,000 purchase price on my taxes." The two lawyers laughed conspiratorially. The Playpen was not normally the kind of place Dusty would have found himself on a Friday night, but when Jerry Kubiak, his oldest son's best man, had planned the bachelor party, he figured he needed to invite Dusty out of respect. He figured the older man would stay for the obligatory length of time, then head out before things got going heavily. The party of 15 arrived at the high-end club en masse. After being checked at the door for proper identification, they headed down a corridor before turning into the main part of the club. It was on the wall right before they stepped into the open main room. Jerry, acting as host for the evening, spotted it first. "Oh hell, look at that babe. That might be the hottest painting I've ever seen in my life. All of my women have that look after I'm done with them," yelled Willie Aguilar, another of Robbie's groomsmen. "Holy shit. It can't be," Jerry yelled, pulling up short after reading the name tag attached to the photo. Jerry went silent, but Willie, not even thinking about what he was looking at, read the tag out loud for the whole group to hear. "Thou shalt not covet," Willie yelled. "Tracy Dustman, as painted by Emile Gaultier. Hey Robbie, she's got the same name." Realizing what he was reading, Willie went silent. The others in the group pushed forward to see what the card said. Robbie's face went white as he read the card and looked at the painting. He immediately turned around and looked at his father, then at his younger brother. Dusty shrugged as Mike's face turned crimson. "Been there, seen that," Dusty said to both boys as he kept on walking. The sons looked at each other. They and the rest of the party gathered at 3 tables on one side of the stage. Everybody was waiting on Dusty to explain. "This is how your mother and her scum-sucking attorney lover broke the news to me that she was cheating on me." This was mounted on the wall behind his bar at his house. It didn't have a card on it, but I knew immediately what and who I was looking at. They had the painter color her hair black to be cute, but I knew who that was right away. It was at a Christmas party at his home, and apparently everybody at the law firm knew they had been screwing and had seen the painting. Your mother and her scumsucker both thought my finding out was hysterical. I don't know how the painting got here. Dad, you've got to get them to take that down. That's Mom. Mike hissed at his father. I'll go talk to the manager, but you didn't seem too concerned with what she was doing when I first told you several years ago. I seem to recall you wondering what I did to make her mad at me. Mike looked sheepish as most of the group looked at him with an accusing look. Please, Dad, do something, he urged. Dusty seemed to be the calmest person in the group. He quietly got up, went to the bar, and asked to speak to the manager. There was a lot of gesticulating and some raised voices before Dusty came back to the group, which was mostly sitting quietly as opposed to what most groups like that do at a strip club. The manager says the owner bought the painting from a private individual and it has been a popular addition to the club. If I want it down, I can buy it for 10 grand, Dusty said. I told him I had no inclination to spend 10 grand on an erotic painting of my cheating her ex-wife. Dad, both Robbie and Mike wailed. The evening's activities were over at that point. Both of Dusty's sons headed straight to their mother's apartment when they got back to Chicago. Dusty went back to his own apartment and slept like a baby. Tracy looked like hell as she sat down in the groom's parents' row a few minutes before the wedding was to start, Dusty thought. He guessed her spending several hours explaining an erotic, nude, post-coital painting on a strip club wall to his sons was tougher than he thought. Last night wasn't too awkward, Dusty said sarcastically to his ex-wife as she sat down a few feet away from him in the church pew. Did you know Scumsucker sold that painting? Not until last night I didn't, she answered as she blushed furiously. The former spouses had spent hardly any time in each other's presence since the divorce 5 years earlier. Dusty had to admit that Tracy still looked good, aside from the red, cried-out eyes. After the ceremony and the mother-son dance, Tracy was a popular dance partner at the reception, particularly with Robbie's friends. After talking to Robbie and Mike the night previous, she knew the reason why, and was prepared when several of the 20-somethings tried to pull her in too close or let their hands wander. There was a time when you would have put a stop to this pretty quickly, she said to Dusty when she came back to the table after having danced with her fifth handsy partner. There was a time when you were my wife and my concern, Dusty said quietly. Then you became somebody else's concern. Now I guess the concern is yours alone. But from what I remember and the rumor mill says, you like them young. Just try to be somewhat discreet tonight for the boys' sake. Tracy's face showed her irritation, but nothing came out of her mouth. She knew that almost all of her sexual liaisons since her divorce were with men closer to the ages of her sons than her own age. She just didn't know how her ex-husband knew this, as well. When she wasn't dancing and was sitting at the table with Dusty and several other family members, Tracy couldn't help but watch her ex-husband out of the corner of her eye. She noted that the past 5 years had been good to him, with the only noticeable changes being a few lines in his face and the graying of about half of his hair. His blue eyes remained as piercing as always, and the line of his jaw was every bit as striking as it was when the pair first met a lifetime ago. God, I left this man for what? A little more sex? A little more aggressive sex? Arf, what an idiot, Tracy thought to herself. "Yeah, sis, you blew it big time," said Tracy's sister in her ear, causing Tracy to break from her reverie. "Tell me I just didn't say that out loud," she said to Hannah. Her sister giggled before replying quietly. "No, but the looks you've been giving Dusty haven't been too subtle," Hannah responded. "You might as well just ask him to screw you silly while we're all sitting here. Actually, not screw me silly. Just to make slow, passionate love to me, like we used to do. Then cuddle together after. Nobody has done that to me since we split." "Maybe if you asked him nicely," Hannah said. "After all, it is Dusty, the nicest guy in the world. If he still loves you half as much as he used to." If asked, the nicest guy in the world would have admitted to still loving his ex-wife, at least to some extent. He was also smart enough to know, though, that he would never trust Tracy again, nor would he be able to recover from her betrayal with Fielding. Dusty didn't even attempt to date for the first year after his divorce, although there were several women in his workplace who made it known they would welcome his advances once they found out he was a single man. In the next few years, he came to find out that single women significantly outnumbered single men in his age range. Finding dates was not a problem. Getting over his trust issues was the problem. Dusty did in fact wake up in his apartment the morning after the wedding with a beautiful blonde. Kristen Alford, and of Robbie's bride, was sitting at the Alford family table watching various young men dancing and groping the groom's mother. She kept looking back and forth between the dancing and Dusty's reaction to it, or rather his lack of reaction. She and virtually everyone else at the wedding had heard the tale of Robbie's parents, and she was trying to gauge the continuing level of love Robbie's handsome father had for his ex. Discerning that Dusty wasn't carrying a torch for his ex, Kristen made her way over to the Dustman's family table and asked the Dustman patriarch if he wanted to dance. Upon looking at her, Dusty was greeted with the sight of a 5 to 7 blonde beauty with long legs wearing a dark blue dress that ended mid-thigh and looked to be tailored to her every curve. When he saw that she had no rings on her left hand, he smiled and got out of his chair. Thanks to Tracy's love of dancing, Dusty had taken lessons early in their marriage and was quite adept on the floor. The pair cut a dashing figure. They even got in some talking during the slow songs as Aunt Kristen snuggled in close. Dusty didn't spend too much time at the groom's family table after that. When he and Kristen weren't dancing, they were seated together at the bride's family table, and their eyes seemed to be only for each other. He found out that the 52-year-old Kristen taught high school about an hour away from Chicago and had been divorced for 20 years from an abusive husband. "If you don't mind me asking, how does a beautiful woman like yourself stay on the market for 20 years? Dusty asked. "Major trust issues for one. Plus, I don't just jump into bed with any man," she answered matter-of-factly. "Good answer," said a smiling Dusty. Dusty and Kristen started working on their trust issues together when they woke up the next day. About a year later, there was a second wedding knotting the Dustman and Alford families. Robbie stood up as best man for his father. Internal Revenue Service Special Agent Michael Dustman made sure that James Fielding was audited 12 years in a row, costing the attorney more than $1 million in additional taxes and fines. Fielding was a few minutes late heading into the IRS building for his 12th straight audit. His accountant was already inside. Fielding knew that somebody must have targeted him with the IRS, but he had so many enemies the list was long, and he didn't have the time to check them all out. These IRS bozos were costing him plenty, Fielding thought as he walked toward the building. If he ever found who ratted him out, there would be hell to pay, because he was James Fielding, and nobody messed with him. He was inside his own head pretty good, and wasn't paying complete attention to his surroundings when a man wearing a baseball hat and dark sunglasses reached out with his left hand as he and Fielding passed each other. Fielding crumpled to the ground a split second after he felt the pain in his testicles. He had barely heard the crackle of the stun gun. One quick kick landed on his nose, breaking it. Another one landed on the side of his jaw. His head snapped back, and before he could even feel the pain, another landed on the front of his face. The assailant then maneuvered near his legs, and Fielding could see raise his knee, and even before he could move, it came down. Sharp pain streamed throughout his body, sending him into a dark black world. Robbie grinned as he put the weapon back in his hoodie pocket, took out 3 teeth that had plunged in his shoe, and kept walking. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.